Welcome. In this video, we'll be taking a look at how to solve word problems. So if you haven't had an opportunity to copy down this list of keywords, I've referred to it in a few videos on solving word problems. But if you hadn't had an opportunity to copy these down, I would suggest doing that because we'll be using this list on the below problems. So I also want you to note that I did include a strategy for solving word problems, and again, this doesn't mean that it's an exhaustive list. It's just a list of things to consider when you're going through a word problem, but it's not meant to be the end-all and be-all. So there may be additional things that we have to consider. We may be considering some of the steps but not others, and so on. So let's take a look at problem 1 and see how we might solve it. So problem 1 says a garden table and a bench cost $777 combined. The garden table costs $73 less than the bench. What is the cost of the garden table? So the way I see it, our goal, which I always like to write down in my own words, is to figure out how much money that the garden table costs. So, like I said, in previous videos, we've actually focused on drawing the picture. What I see when I look at the sentences of number 1 are words that can readily be translated into math symbols. So the first sentence says, a garden table and a bench cost $777 combined. I see a math sentence there. So what I see is that the garden table and a bench, that to me means add. So if I add the cost of the garden table plus the cost of the bench, then what they're telling me is I should get $777. The second sentence also jumps out at me as a math sentence. It says the garden table costs $73 less than the bench. Well, the word cost or cost is another kind of like a keyword for equals. So I'm going to add that here as well. So let's see if we can turn that into a sentence. It says the garden table costs, so that tells me that G equals, the garden table costs what? Well, it's 73 less than the bench. So remember, with subtraction, this is a little bit tricky, but 73 less than the bench means that the bench is our total, and then we're subtracting 73. Okay. So the first step is to just translate your English sentences into math sentences. Okay, and then step 2, we now have our equations. So step 2 is to solve. So notice that we have 2 equations and 2 variables. So if I want to find a number answer, it would be very difficult to do that, actually be impossible to do that with this one equation up here. Because I have 2 variables, sure, I can either get G or B alone, but that means I'll have G or B in my final answer. So if I look at the second equation, I'm going to actually use the second equation to help me to solve the first. So notice what the second equation tells me. It tells me that every time I see G, I can put B minus 73 in its place. Well, in the first equation, I see a G there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this G out, and I'm going to put B minus 73 in its place. So what I get is B minus 73 plus B equals 777. And then if I solve this, I have B plus B is 2B. So I have 2B minus 73 equals 777. Add 73 to both sides. And I get 2B equals 850. And then I'm going to divide by 2. So I end up with B equals 425. And now, have I answered the question? Well, the question was, I have to find the amount of money that the garden table costs. Well, I found the amount of money that the bench costs. So how do I figure out the garden table? Well, what I know from my second equation is that the garden table is $73 less than the bench. So if I plug that in, I've got garden table equals the cost of the bench, which I now know is $425, minus 73. And that means that the garden table is going to equal $352. Okay, going back here for just 1 second, why was I allowed to do the substitution? Well, again, what's happening here is I'm not doing anything funny. What I'm doing is I'm taking G out, but I'm putting something equivalent to G in its place. How do I know B minus 73 is equal to G? Well, that's what my second equation tells me. So B minus 73 and G are interchangeable. Okay, let's take a look at one more example, number 4. So I want you to try this, pause the video, and then restart when ready. So for number 4, let's see if we can come up with a way to solve it. It says a total of 447 tickets were sold for the school play. The number of student tickets sold was 2 times the number of adult tickets sold. How many adult tickets were sold? So my goal is to figure out the number of adult tickets sold. And again, when I read this, math sentences are popping out at me. So the first sentence says a total of 447 tickets were sold for the school play. Well, it tells me later that there are adult tickets and there are student tickets. So if there's a total of 447, that should mean if I add the adult plus the student, that I should get 447. The next sentence says the number of student tickets sold was. Well, remember, was is a key word for equals. So the number of student tickets sold, that's S, equals 2 times the number of adult tickets. So the way I'd write that is 2 times A. So again, I've got 2 variables and 2 equations. So I'm going to use the second equation to help me to solve the first. So what the second equation tells me is every time I see an S, I can put 2A in its place. So here's an S in the first equation, and I'm going to put 2A in its place. So I'm first going to write it out again. And now instead of having S, I'm going to plug 2A in its place because they're equal. And now when I solve this, 1A plus 2A is 3A equals 447. And then if I divide by 3, I end up with A equals 149. And now have I answered the question? Well, remember my goal was to figure out the number of adult tickets sold, and that's exactly what A stands for.